The mysteries of the Gloam-eyed Queen persist to this day. You could even say the mysteries are still growing. With bated breath, we all waited for the Gloam-eyed Queen to make an appearance in the Shadow Realm, but it never happened. Despite the themes of death and serpents, she remained an elusive mystery. Although FromSoft can be incredibly vague and light on their lore, they rarely outright don't give us any hints one way or another, especially with major characters. I suspect the reason FromSoft didn't give us any more direct references to the Gloam-eyed Queen is because, well, we might have all the clues we need to put together a cohesive theory regarding her existence. Perhaps the same could be said for the shadowy Velka from Dark Souls 1, but that can wait till after Elden Ring. Let's start with what we know and go from there. This is straight from the wiki, as there's no need to reinvent the wheel here. The Gloam-eyed Queen was an Empyrean chosen by the Fingers. She led the Apostles in their god hunt, wielded the power of destined death, and channeled its black flames through her Godslayer's greatsword. She cradled newborn godskin apostles in a swaddling cloth made from patches of supple skin sewn together. Her apostles developed inhuman physiology and would grow to be the death of the gods. Queen Marika desired the removal of the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring to create the Golden Order. After the Gloam-eyed Queen and her apostles were defeated at the hands of Malekith, the Rune of Death was sealed away within his black blade, and the true power of the Godslayer incantations was lost. The Gloam-eyed Queen's sword was locked away at the bottom of the Divine Tower of Caelid, and her fate remains unknown. Now, this is all that we know about the Gloam-eyed Queen, which isn't much. However, I think we can infer a lot more information based on side stories, environmental clues, thematical narratives, and more. Obviously, here at this channel, the more includes psychology. Of course, what follows is my own personal speculation, so take everything with a grain of salt. I'm a big fan of the idea that side stories can provide clues for the more elusive lore questions. I also think the concepts of micro and macrocosm are incredibly important in understanding the story as a whole, meaning that galactic events are meant to tell us the story of an individual. For example, the One Great seems to be this cosmic idea or entity that was once whole and fractured. Well, the same could be said about the Elden Ring, the lands themselves going from one unified land and then split into the lands between and the Shadowlands, and ultimately Marika. Because these are all connected and tell the same story, we can think of them as pieces to the same puzzle, meaning that the physical lands can tell us a story about Marika, or Marika can tell us a story about the One Great, and so on. So just because there is not a direct reference to an idea or character, doesn't mean it's not in-game. Perhaps the real truth lies in their parallel stories. With that being said, let's continue line by line from this wiki and see what we can infer from other stories, items, or environments. The Gloam-eyed Queen was an Empyrean chosen by the Fingers. We know that both Marika and the Gloam-eyed Queen were Empyreans. Not just Empyreans, but opposites of each other. Two sides of the same coin. One of life and one of death. Well, we see the same story within Elden Ring, the story of Miquella and Malenia. Both Empyreans and opposites of each other. Miquella is eternally youthful, while Malenia is eternally dying, or rotting. I think it's reasonable to deduce some information from Miquella and Malenia and apply it to Marika and the Gloam-eyed Queen. I think it's fair to speculate that Marika and the Gloam-eyed Queen could be twins, perhaps even caring about one another at some point. She cradled newborn godskin apostles in a swaddling cloth made from patches of supple skin sewn together. Sacred cloth of the godskin apostles, made from supple skin sewn together. The Gloam-eyed Queen cradles newborn apostles swaddled in this cloth. Soon they will grow to become the death of the gods. Robe made by sewing together patches of smooth skin. Subcutaneous fat makes it plump and soft. Worn by godskin nobles, known for their seven-faced aprons. Nobles are the most ancient apostles who are said to have assimilated inhuman physiology, not unlike the Crucible, the Erd Tree in its primordial form. You know who has supple skin and a ton of subcutaneous fat? Babies. That's right, those fat, pinchable cheeks and rolls that look like the Michelin Man are thanks to subcutaneous fat, better known as baby fat. And if you're anything like me, that baby fat lasted an awkwardly long time. We also get information about the inhuman physiology of these godskins, which we all know to be similar to that of serpents. She led the apostles in their god hunt, wielded the power of destined death, and channeled its black flames through the Godslayer's greatsword. I have always been confused about this god hunt for a couple different reasons. The first is simply why? what happened in the Gloam-eyed Queen's life that sparked this incessant hunting of the gods? Did they do something to her or her loved ones? She's not just about death. No, she has a very specific crusade aimed at a certain group of people. One thing I do know about George R. R. Martin is he likes to write about people and ultimately the reason behind their actions.
You know, I've always been fascinated by human beings and all their complexity, and even human beings who do appalling things. You know, the question is, why?
The other thing that confuses me is what gods? It would seem, at least in the base game, that there is no evidence of these hunted down gods. So, was she successful in her hunt? And what was the catalyst of this hunt? Well, if Marika and the Gloam-eyed Queen are twins, which I am very unsure of, then that would put her at the shaman village as well. Not only that, but would also mean that it wasn't just Marika's family that got tortured and stuffed into jars, but also the Gloam-eyed Queen's. What if Marika wasn't alone in her revenge, and this god hunt wasn't referencing the current gods, but rather the gods that the Hornsent worshipped? This could explain the god hunt and why the godskins assimilated inhuman physiology from the Crucible. Perhaps they come from this time. She cradled newborn godskin apostles in a swaddling cloth made from patches of supple skin sewn together. Now, there's not much here, but we do have a statue and a character that comes to mind when reading this sentence. Mesmer was the chosen weapon of Marika's to exact her revenge. He was the commander of the army that not only destroyed an entire culture, but more than likely killed the gods of that culture. I think it's possible that Mesmer is the original godskin, and that the statue is the genesis of the god hunt. This could also explain why the following godskins have serpentine features, and the same pale skin as Mesmer's base serpent. They are kin to Mesmer. Now, don't get ahead of me, I know that statue is of Marika. Queen Marika desired the removal of the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring to create the Golden Order. After the Gloam-eyed Queen and her apostles were defeated at the hands of Malekith, the Rune of Death was sealed away within his black blade, and the true power of the Godslayer incantations was lost. One thing we need to remind ourselves of is that Marika is the vessel of the Elden Ring, and she's the only person ever mentioned with the Elden Ring. There are many gods, many empyreans, many Elden Lords, but only one Elden Ring, and only one person ever mentioned with it. Marika is the only constant within this vast narrative of Elden Ring. I'm not going to get into the details of this now, as I have a lengthy video coming out about this very thing. But if this is Marika, which I believe is a widely accepted theory at this point, especially if you're a Tarnished Archaeologist fan, and this is Marika, which it undoubtedly is, then this is also Marika. And without question, this is Marika. Again, I'm not going to get into it in this video, but just look at the darn things. If they are meant to represent different people, then they all had plastic surgery to look like the same person. If you don't believe this, then why does Placiduceus' god have to involve the Elden Ring at all? The god of Rot? No Elden Ring. Fel god? Nope, no Elden Ring. Gods of the Hornsent? No Elden Ring. Old gods? No Elden Ring. And if you say, well, it's because the Elden Ring is here, then why is Malekith here? I mean, Malekith is here, sealing away destined death, that both have direct, unarguable ties to Marika, but this isn't Marika? That just doesn't make any sense. Anyways, the Elden Ring is housed within Marika and seems to represent her as a person, meaning that by taking out death from the Elden Ring, she not only removed it from the world, but also from herself. Recall earlier where we talked about the micro and macrocosm and how different events tell one story. This is exactly what I mean. We don't need to be fed every single thing by a direct reference from an item. It's okay to speculate. It's okay to infer. If we're ever going to figure out this incomprehensible lore web, it's going to take many leaps of faith. We can use these other stories as evidence through the powers of inference.
All that there is came from the one great. Then came fractures, and births, and souls. But the greater will made a mistake. Torment, despair, affliction, every sin, every curse, every one born of the mistake.
All that there is came from the one great, then came fractures, everyone born of the mistake. There are many things fractured in this world, the Elden Ring, the lands themselves, Marika, the natural cycle of life and death, and more. By taking out the Rune of Death, Marika fractures the Elden Ring. And no, I'm not talking about this fracture, but just a literal fracture, as in a smaller piece of a once unified whole. And everyone born after that mistake was cursed. But because this Elden Ring sits within Marika, she doesn't just fracture the ring, she also fractures herself. She literally takes a piece of herself out of her life and suppresses it. To me, all of this makes perfect sense, with the exception of one thing. Marika and the Gloam-eyed Queen being twins. That just doesn't sit right with me. I would think there would have been some sort of evidence of the second person hunting down the gods and killing people in the Shadowlands. But we only ever hear of Marika. It is Marika who leads the hunt against the Hornsent and their gods. It is Marika who has children with inhuman physiology. It is Marika who swaddles Mesmir, the base serpent. It is Marika who has the motivation to start this massacre. It is Marika who houses the Elden Ring, the only person to house the Elden Ring. It is Marika who plucks out the Rune of Death. It is Marika who fractures the Elden Ring and thus herself. All roads lead back to one person, Marika. The Mother archetype has two very distinct forms. One is known as the Great Mother, associated with life, fertility, bounty, plenty, and all things good. The other is known as the Terrible Mother. This archetype is associated with death, destruction, child abandonment, infanticide, and even serpents. The classic person used as the symbol of the Terrible Mother is Medusa. You know, the lady with snakes for hair? One interesting fact about this idea ties back into the Knight of Black Knives and the clue we get from the Godskin noble robes, worn by Godskin nobles known for their 7-face aprons. What's interesting is that we also have 7 walking mausoleums, which house the dead demigods all slain during that fateful night. An interesting detail about this apron is that these 7 faces all have golden eyes, which leads me to believe that they are those 7 dead demigods. However, thanks to this ghost, we know that these children are unwanted and abandoned by Marika, literally killed, more than likely, by her own doing. So we have a direct connection between the Godskins, the Knight of Black Knives, and Marika herself. Now, these archetypes are just two sides of the same coin, that coin being a mother, meaning that one individual housed both of these contrasting concepts, one of life and one of death, one of nurturing and one of abandonment. Think of it like Mother Nature, the life-giving sun, but also the Great Flood. I don't think I need to tell you about the themes of child abandonment within the DLC. Metter is abandoned, Mesmir abandoned, the Forager Brood Pest are abandoned, and the list goes on and on. Both Marika and the Gloam-eyed Queen are presented to us as mothers. Hell, Marika could have her own TLC show with as many kids as she has, and the Gloam-eyed Queen is the mother of the Godskins. I don't think it's coincidence that the developers take the time to present them in this way. I believe it's a possible clue. The game is still trying to tell the story of Marika and the Gloam-eyed Queen, just indirectly, through Mesmir, his conquests and his connections to the Godskin, the fact that he says death about 1 million times, through the themes of child abandonment and motherhood, through stories like Hyetta and Mikola, through statues and environmental storytelling. It's all here, we just need to put it together. When asked about Ranni's dual face and the deeper symbolic meaning behind it, Miyazaki, in the Books of Knowledge Part 2, said the following: "There are several meanings behind Ranni's dual face. It touches on the nature of empyreans and the multiple different aspects they can possess. From God's lips to your ears. Apparently, one characteristic of empyreans is that they can house multiple aspects within themselves, meaning that they are not a singular being, but rather composites of many." That's right. I am officially throwing down the gauntlet and saying Marika and the Gloam-eyed Queen are the same person, simply different aspects of that same person. Together they represent the whole Elden Ring. They represent the cycle of life and death. They represent the lands between and the Shadowlands. They represent the Erd Tree and Shadow Tree. They represent the One Great. We only need to look as far as the Godslayer Greatsword for this confirmation of the split. The base of the sword is a single, unified, strong weapon, and as we move up, a split of that one thing separating into two things, spiraling further and further apart. Now, if that doesn't do it for you, then look to Malekith, who is sealing destined death within his body, Marika's personal shadow. And wouldn't you know that it's the Shadowlands where all manner of death washes up. If that doesn't do it for you either, then look to the DLC trailer, and the body being left behind while the Rune of Death is now God, the creation of gold and shadow. And who has destined death within himself? Oh yeah, Marika's shadow. And what does that body look like? A godskin. Or if you think a snake, that's cool. I mean, they basically share the same theme. And if that doesn't do for you, then look to the emergence of the Elden Ring, a clear separation of worlds, perhaps alluding to the world of life and the world of death. And if all that doesn't do it for you, then look to Melina, who shares both echoes of Marika and the vengeance of the Gloam-eyed Queen. Something I have found interesting is the snakeskin in Bonnie Village. Not only that it's here, but the fact that it's looking right at the whipping hut. If the Gloam-eyed Queen resurfaces through Melina, again who speaks echoes of Marika, because we killed Torrent, I mean come on, we all know that's the reason that she's really mad, then could this snakeskin be the moment when Marika flipped from the great to the terrifying?
Besides, it helps me forget the sheer terror of her.
Perhaps witnessing this horrible event was the trigger of the God Hunt, the trigger of the Godskins, the time when Marika lost herself in revenge. Whatever you make of this snakeskin, the fact that it's staring right at the whipping hut should not be taken lightly. I have long theorized that these demigod children of Marika's are actually just complexes or splinter psyches of emotion that are created during times of trauma. The most obvious of these being Godric and his grafting, being a direct reflection of Marika's horrible past, the reason for it all, the anchor. But there's another very obvious one, especially post-Mesmer, Rykard and the Volcano Manor. Rykard and the Volcano Manor are singularly focused on devouring the gods, regardless of what it takes. Quote, I understand, the road of blasphemy is long and perilous. One cannot walk it unprepared to sin. I don't think it's coincidence that it is here at Mount Gilmere that we see another snakeskin, winged snakes and all manners of serpents, with one thought in mind, killing the gods. We also fight a godskin noble here, right in front of that snakeskin. Obviously that snakeskin is of great importance to the godskins, perhaps alluding yet again to their connection to Mesmer. We have another connection here between Mesmer, Marika, God Hunts, Godskins, and the Gloam-eyed Queen, the abductor virgins. If the theme of killing gods and god hunting is illustrated through snakes and blasphemy, and we see two of Marika's children express this emotion, then the original thought must have begun with Marika herself. I don't think it is Rykard who is saying these words, but rather Marika, or should I say Marika's darker half. If you are thinking to yourself, well, Rykard is not Marika's child, but rather a stepchild, well, don't forget Enya's dialogue.
Indeed. But remember one thing. The demigods are each and all the direct offspring of Queen Marika.
Also, Radagon is Marika. Now, this concept of offspring being created during times of stress is kind of hard to grasp and picture, but luckily we have, yet again, a parallel story, with Melania and her offshoots created during her fight with Radahn. You could even say that these offshoots were quote-unquote fathered by Radahn, but that's for another video. My point is just that, just as Millicent is the pride of Melania, created during this time of stress, the same could be true for Marika and her offspring, elements of herself that just get fractured off. To reiterate, I believe the Gloam-eyed Queen and Marika are one singular person, but two very different personalities that come to the surface, like Jekyll and Hyde. I believe they share a single set of fingers who deem Marika and thus the Gloam-eyed Queen acceptable candidates for godhood. I believe the Gloam-eyed Queen personality was the dominant force during Marika's younger years, while on her tour de force, triggered by the horrors of Bonnie Village, and is why we see the snakeskin here glaring at the whipping hut, promising vengeance upon those responsible in the beginning of the God Hunt. I believe Mesmer is the child of the Gloam-eyed Queen, and thus of Marika, and was the first godskin apostle, and consequently the genesis of the God Hunt aimed at the Hornsent. I believe after this act of revenge was over, Marika the Great resurfaced and witnessed the atrocities that her other half committed. It was here that she vowed never to let this happen again, and sacrificed half of herself, leaving it in the Shadowlands for good. Well, until that one fateful night when the shadow came bubbling up from the surface below. And wouldn't you know, it's Praetor Rykard who is situated right in the thick of it. Perhaps the Gloam-eyed Queen has been knocking at the door for quite some time now, enraged by her suppression. I will leave you with this final thought. The central theme of Elden Ring is duality, balance, and what happens when the world gets off balance. What happens when a major aspect gets suppressed? The iconography we see in the Shadowlands, and especially as we near the Gate of Divinity, is all about this duality. The spiral, two trees merging as one, and even the statue of two people seemingly merging into one. Even the reliefs on this tower show man's duality, two faces looking the opposite direction. I think the shadow tree itself also shows this duality. But what happens when one overtakes the other, or flat out seals the other away? What happens to that person? What happens to that world? Especially if that person is a god. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And as always, I'll see you in the next one. Much love.